Since the mainstream media has recently blasted Caroline Kennedy for her frequent use of the verbal crutch, you know, in interviews, and since Governor David Paterson of New York now says that Kennedy's lack of elected experience does not help her, and since a new poll shows that Kennedy's support among New York Democrats is lagging, it is curious in our third story in the countdown that Governor Sarah Palin of Alaska has now suggested that she and Ms. Kennedy have been treated differently by the media because of which class, her term, each belongs to. But the governor was given free rein to offer all manner of jaw-dropping answers to softball questions posed by a right-wing former radio talk show host, failed sportscaster, one-time would-be O.J. Simpson assassin, and so-called documentarian John Ziegler. More on that interview and how Katie Couric, Tina Fey, and I wound up in it later in the news hour. But on the question of, did media class bias cause a Sarah Palin, Caroline Kennedy double standard, the governor answered thus.
I've been interested also to see how Caroline Kennedy will be handled, and if she'll be handled with kid gloves or if she will be under such a microscope also. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and I think that as we watch that, we will perhaps be able to prove that there is a class issue here also that was such a factor in the scrutiny of my candidacy versus, say, the scrutiny of what her candidacy may be.
Even though she didn't really have a candidacy, since she is not in the traditional sense a candidate running for office, nor was she seeking the #2 job in the land. Nevertheless, the media scrutiny of Kennedy has clearly taken a toll. A recent survey from Public Policy Polling finds New York Democrats favor Andrew Cuomo over Kennedy for the job, 58 to 27%. And the governor of New York, David Paterson, who obviously will make this appointment, has now said Kennedy's, quote, lack of elected experience does not help her. He describes it as a minus in his consideration of 10 to 15 good candidates. Let's bring in Bloomberg News political columnist and the Washington editor of The Week magazine, Margaret Carlson. Good evening, Margaret.
Good evening, Keith.
Just when we thought maybe Governor Palin had run out, her new champion, John Ziegler, who says he's dedicated his life to her in some sort of non-creepy way, he raises the specter of class bias, and the governor just takes off with it. This is certainly a strange thing. I meant this. When was the last time there was an issue of what class somebody belonged to in any race in this country, in any direction, up or down?
Well, Republicans use the word elite usually as code for class warfare. Sarah Palin makes a couple of comparisons that are completely inept. First of all, Caroline Kennedy has gotten tremendous scrutiny, unlike others who are competing or not competing for the appointment to replace Hillary Clinton. She's the one that's gotten all the scrutiny. Also, listen, there are a lot of kind of inadequate people in the Senate, and the world gets by. But if you're running to be a heartbeat away from a 72-year-old four-time cancer survivor, I think you deserve a fairly high level of scrutiny. And she came into the game, I think, actually with a lot of praise right after that convention speech. But she brought a lot of things with her. Troopergate, charging the government for nights staying at her own house, all kinds of little, trying to get librarians fired. She had a record which also raised a lot of questions. So on the merits, there is a difference between the two people.
And given what's happened in the graph of the Caroline Kennedy appointment candidacy, if her name drew her enormous attention, did it not seem to turn into enormous critical scrutiny pretty quickly? And could you not actually sit there and say maybe class actually worked against her, not for her?
Well, it's definitely a two-edged sword. She might be on the short list because of being a Kennedy, but she certainly got more criticism because of it. I know lots of people, including myself, who have the verbal tic, and if you've raised a teenager, as I have, you go through a period when it's really, really a bad affliction. Listen to Sarah Palin, go back and listen to the second debate when she's doing, or the first debate when she's doing You Betcha, which is not a verbal tic. It's a theatrical thing to try to be in a class that, who knows if she's in it, with multiple winking. This is not the behavior of somebody who's got a verbal tic. This is somebody who's trying to play to a certain group in society. I think by the way, at a time when the country was moving to the center and the left, I think Sarah Palin was playing much more than John McCain, to a group way on the right that was anti-intellectual and anti-smart.
Well, and speaking of playing to, there's something confusing about this, and we'll hear a lot more of this interview later on, but she sold a kind of rugged frontier individualism along with the usual Republican lines about individual responsibility, individual this, government out of that. It's all about the individual. Why is she willing to latch on to any excuse that that is offered to her? Sexism, the media's fault, class warfare, elitism, left-hander versus right-hander. I mean, it's almost everything.
Yeah. Well, the media is an equal opportunity destroyer, so I don't think you can accuse the media of class bias, although I think there is a bias towards having smart people, especially after 8 years of George Bush. But there is a grievance card that the Republican Party pulls while they're saying that they don't believe in group interests. And just as when something bad happens to me, I would prefer it to be not because it's me, but because of some bias against women. Then it's impersonal and you can deflect it. That's what goes on with Sarah Palin. She's got somebody else, she needs somebody else to blame. And now it's classism in America.
Oh, and Tina Fey and Katie Couric and
Katie.
Me.
And you, Keith.
Yeah, I know.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Margaret, I've been validated. Margaret Carlson of Bloomberg News and The Week magazine, who's not as evil as I am. Great thanks as always.
Thanks, Keith.